Chapter 125. Somewhere, in a different part of the universe, an Ortonian child who'd been born at the same time as Alden Thorne was excited. Maybe too excited. Stop. Alden shook his head as he watched the opposite stone on his desk glow soft white for the fourth time in the past 15 minutes. You have to pay for those. He finished making note of his very first successful casting of the word chain in his ledger, using the Palace of Unbreaking's official name for it. My body becomes my assistant, and admiring how awesome he was at drawing logograms when he had the chain on top of his enhanced dexterity. Then he placed his brush bristles down in the cleaning divot on the cap of the ink bottle. The foggy crystal checker was still glowing. Alden shut the ledger and picked up the stone. I hope you're surrounded by a bunch of other kids right now, he thought. And they saw your stone light up, and they're all wildly impressed. He also hoped the little enthusiast had been saving up the pleasant halves of these word chains as a celebratory reply to Alden's first message, or that they were baby word chains of some kind. Otherwise they were piling up the dead fast. Alden had muted his team's conference call while he worked. They'd had it going all day, with people vanishing from it when needed and reappearing during their breaks to offer ideas or ask questions. After tucking his ledger into his desk and his blinky checker into a pocket, he joined back in. "All right," he said, "last chance to decide if you want me to pick up anything for you. I'm heading to Rightwares. I want beef jerky." He means, do you need anything for Jim, Jeffy? But I do want it for Jim. I always eat protein during our break. If I see beef jerky at the right shop, I'll get some, said Alden. I'll check in once I get there. He muted them again so that they wouldn't make him nervous. They'd been doing a lot of worrying and rehashing all afternoon. Some of them seemed to enjoy fretting, but he didn't find it helpful. When Alden emerged from his room, he found Lute sitting on the floor by the fireplace, working on some kind of craft project. I got the chain, Alden said, gesturing to himself. My shirt tag has been removed, with scissors this time, and my body has become my assistant. Congratulations. As your tutor, I expect a world's greatest teacher mug. By the way, I don't think you can make a shirt fast enough for it to be useful on the course. Maybe with some practice. A shirt? Lute held up a net tank top made out of purple yarn. Isn't it beautiful? This is just a test piece. You could do this same kind of thing with your cord, though. Give me 10 more minutes, and it'll be a floor-length dress. Even your ankles would be safe. From things larger than the holes in the net anyway. Alden stepped over to check it out. It's cool. I found a guy online who crochets paracord backpacks for people. But why are you in here designing theoretical armor for me? Because it's much more interesting than my homework. And I couldn't think of anything else fun to do to help the team. Although I'm sure if I could get my hands on the whip. Khan hasn't even gotten his hands on it. I'm sneakier than Khan. Lute threw the tank top on over his shirt. How do I look? Alden took in the hastily made purple net. Do you want to come to the right shop with me? Lute looked down at himself. It's so bad you won't even answer, huh? Line of asterisks. The list of supplies wasn't long, but it was easy to get distracted in the island's largest right shop. Alden, you need a grappling hook. Those are neat. A handheld line launcher. I'm buying one as a present for myself after I make it through first quarter probably. Levitating pulleys. A portable autoloom. Self-knotting rope. All exciting things, Alden agreed, examining the spools of cordage in front of him. Why are you not buying the exciting things, then? Lute had the loom in his arms. Because gym time is training time. And during training time, I operate under the assumption that when shit goes really wrong I'm not going to have access to ginormous hardware stores full of magical doodads. What's more likely, me getting stranded on another planet and finding the perfect right-made tool? Or me getting stranded on another planet and finding some kind of rope? You couldn't rely on a mad scientist's fully stocked laboratory being within running distance all the time. Lute didn't answer. The silence was conspicuous considering how much talking he'd been doing since they arrived. What? Alden asked, looking around at him. Nothing. Luke hastily put the loom back on the shelf. You don't have to pretend it's reasonable. I know it isn't. Alden went back to studying the cord. Even if I do end up in a crisis, the chances of that crisis involving me being stuck on a planet without a system and nothing but one companion and a rope we wove out of natural fibers are astronomical. Hey, a man needs to be prepared for all eventualities, Luke said lightly. Sometimes systems break. Sometimes drone propellers destroy eyeballs. Are you planning to learn to make ropes out of natural fibers, too? Chelena North needs wilderness survival classes. The fact that we don't have them is criminal. But I'm joking about learning rope making. Mostly. And I came here to buy something like this. He reached for a spool of paracord in a painful shade of fluorescent yellow. I'm not completely into making gym harder for myself. Especially not with a team aspect this time. This is an ultra-strong survival cord, about as fancy as something this simple gets. And I'll be carrying a ton of it. There was no rule about how much rope Alden could bring to class. The outer sheath of this particular paracord was fire-resistant, the inner strands provided him with some interesting opportunities, and it was strong enough that Lucille could haul every member of the team up the wall with it at once if for some reason that became a good idea. Now we need temper spheres even though they're probably not going to be useful at all. A bottle of that powder Everly is to have to cast her ice trap, and beef jerky. They are not going to have that. I know. Line of asterisks. I can't believe they had 8 different kinds of beef jerky. As he headed through the locker room, Alden tossed a shopping bag toward Jeffy, temporarily distracting the aqua brute from whatever he'd been telling Reinhard. So many flavors. His delighted tone was a contrast to the conversation going on nearby. The boys on Soren's team looked like they were discussing something serious. Is Soren doing all right? Alden asked. The light shaper had been a lot more rational by the time Alden had left the healing hospital last night. Rational enough that when he had phoned his mother to tell her where he was and what had happened, he had managed to make it sound like he'd used emergency teleportation the second the fire started instead of arguing with everyone about whether or not he could hide his injuries from the faculty. They've been growing him new skin for the past few hours, said Fibri. He feels fine, and he'll be back at school first thing next week. But he is upset they told him no gym until Wednesday. Did the instructors talk to you? Greater than Ignacio asked. He was searching through a heavy bag that Alden knew from previous glimpses contained an alarming number of blades. According to Reinhard, Ignacio bought bulk lots of old knives off auction websites and used a spell to sharpen each one before he added it to his collection. You mean about what happened? Alden shrugged. I got a check-in call from somebody. An instructor. Marion pulled me aside before engaging with the unexpected to see if I needed anything. Other than that, not really. The check-in had come from the trauma specialist he'd been assigned when he'd first arrived on the island. He was still having regularly scheduled video calls with her. It wasn't required, but it was so strongly recommended by everyone, security people at the TC, the Public Health and Safety Office, intake counselors, that going along was better for now. And she was really good about not insisting on details he couldn't or didn't want to share. He thought it was overkill that the school had called her for this, though, even if she was listed as one of his medical providers. He hadn't gotten so stressed out that he took a risk with his powers. Ignacio was opening his mouth to say something else when Max walked in. Winston, who was replacing the white laces on his shoes with red ones, burst out, "There you are. Where have you been, you jerk? We've been sending you messages all day telling you our plans for the runs. The plans that involve you all demanding I drop zones exactly where you want, when you want?" Max tossed his backpack onto a bench and yanked his shirt off over his head. "It's such a deeply considered stratagem, and my role is so terribly complicated. However will I prepare myself to assist you if I don't answer your messages?" Everyone was suddenly very busy changing their clothes. Alden scooted toward the nearest shower to get busy with it himself. "It's not our fault you couldn't keep up last time," Winston said as Alden latched the door behind himself. "Marcia says you shouldn't be such a dick about running out of gas." High ranks always carry low ranks in this kind of competition anyway. If you just cast what we tell you to, you can sit around, and one of us will get you to the finish line." Alden grimaced. Max raised his voice. "I promise to cast exactly what you all tell me to. I won't offer a single word of advice to the team. Vandy can try to hold you all together while Marcia chases down worthy opponents and the rest of you pose for the camera. I will say not a word. So let it be known. They are getting along even worse than I expected." Alden was awfully relieved he hadn't been assigned to that team. Oddly, Mehdi wasn't commenting on the spat. He'd been quiet ever since their team's double loss, and Hoyu had called him sulky when they were discussing him as a possible target for Reinhard. "I know they say highly competitive environments help Avowed make faster progress. But we've only had one day of team competition, and someone's already caught on fire." Alden couldn't imagine that smaller-scale duels would lead to less hard feelings. The third years must have gone through this together, and they seem sane. At least the Bs do. The second years are abnormal, but Rahul says they are a special case. Alden would most likely be in class with these same people next quarter and the one after. At some point it was common for high achievers to end up with higher-level gym groups and low achievers to repeat a course. But until then, he was rooting for his class to be very normal. Bland. The vanilla pudding of CNH classes. He walked out wearing his unitard a minute later to find Jeffy trying to soothe Max with a strip of beef jerky. "It's pepper-flavored," he said, waving it under Max's nose. "I don't want it." "How do you know if you don't bite it?" "Jeffy, let's go meet up with our group. They are already waiting in the gym. Anyway, Max might be saving room for the dinner tonight. There's going to be pork so many ways. Hoyu can tell you all about it. He's memorized the menu." Line of asterisks. Their group would be facing Team Fabrice for the first run. As they walked out to the track, the sky was overcast, and the wind was blowing so hard there was grit flying through the air. Marisol and Lucille led the way, hauling bags of clay soil with them. Jerry and Everly were right behind them, discussing their roles quietly so that the other team couldn't hear. Reinhard was giving Lexi unsolicited tips about who to attack with Ruther if the archer wasn't available and the need was urgent. And Hoyu and Alden were bringing up the rear with Jeffy and Astrid. The other half of the class would be watching from the bleachers while Principal Sleyca, Instructor Klein, and Instructor Marion took turns highlighting team tactics and breaking down the ways individual students had chosen to use their powers. Alden was looking forward to having his turn in the audience even as he dreaded having his decision-making critiqued. As his shoes hit the pavement, he checked himself over for the third time since setting foot outside. Yep. All still here. 2,000 feet of per record sounded like a ton, but it was a very portable amount. Alden had it wrapped around him in 2 crossbody loops to make an X over his chest, and he was wearing a pouch full of his temper spheres. He would be allowed to carry a small knife or scissors to cut the cord if he wanted, but he did not want having unnecessary sharp objects on your person versus the team with the S-rank knife meister was a bad idea. Instead, he'd pre-cut the cord into long sections that were tied together with loose knots. That way he could dole out lengths of it to teammates or sacrifice pieces without wasting much time. "We should think of this rematch as an opportunity," said Reinhard as they took their place at the starting line on the track. "The day before yesterday is history." "Literally," Astrid said. "It's literally history. So let's make new history together." He trailed off then looked around at them all uncertainly. "I've never done a pep talk before, but I thought I should do one as co-captain." Several people had wanted to try their hand at leading the team. Rather than having a big argument about it, they decided to have 4 captains. 2 per run. The captaincy wasn't about directing overall strategy or approaches to obstacles, since that was already agreed on. What they needed was someone who could keep track of the state of the game and rearrange team members to make sure their plans stayed viable after attacks from the other team had injured or killed people. Reinhard and Jerry were in charge of this run. Hoyu and Astrid were in charge of the next. Alden had been a little surprised that Astrid wanted to try giving orders, but she seemed worried that she couldn't contribute enough in other ways. Jerry suddenly cleared her throat and put her hands on her hips. "All right," avowed. She bellowed. Their whole team took a step back from her in surprise. Olive, the adjuster on Team P125, yelping, whirled around to stare at her. Instructor Ivanova, standing by the track doing final hurdle checks on her tablet, looked startled too. "Today I want you to think about one thing and one thing only. Do you know what that is?" Jerry demanded. "Better teamwork," Hoyu said. "Aiming well," suggested Reinhard. "Sportsmanship?" Astrid asked. "Impressing the principal," Jeffy exclaimed. "None of that," shouted Jerry. "Victory dines at the tables of those who have prepared the greatest feasts. She can only grow fat on our preparation, our love for the game, and the flesh of our enemies." Alden exchanged a look with Hoyu. On the other side of him, Everly was nodding along with the speech. "I won't lie to you," said Jerry, shaking her head. "We are not truly prepared. We have not sweated enough yet to fill Victory's cup. And our love for this game is just beginning to blossom." "Wow," Jeffy said in an awestruck voice. "So what do we have left to offer Victory to tempt her toward our table?" "Not sportsmanship?" Astrid whispered. There was an extended pause. Then, Reinhard looked over at the other team. "That's right. Look at your enemy. They are our offerings to Victory. When they pass you by on the course, when they come at you with their weapons, when you feel the stirrings of intimidation, remember, they are Victory's sustenance. And we are her hunters. We will not let her starve." Jerry took a deep breath, then smiled. "I've always wanted to give a pep talk. I thought you guys might need some extra vigor, since P125 has beaten us before. I modeled it after a speech my hockey coach gave." "How was it?" "Energetic. Motivational in a slightly threatening way." "Is the hockey team all right?" "Victory. But didn't we agree that victory wasn't our only goal? A speech about maybe being okay with losing doesn't sound as good." Jerry protested. "How am I supposed to inspire you all with that?" "I totally loved it," Heloisa shouted. "Thank you," Jerry shouted back. "But you're on the wrong team." "I don't know if it made me feel inspired," thought Alden. "But I definitely feel more awake now." Beside him, Maricela was looking guiltily at the pile of dirt bags. "It's fine," said Alden. "We all decided on it. But I could just pour out the sand from the bags in the gym. Or forget practicing and focus on Vict. You did that last time." Lexi was staring at the track ahead of them. "If you want specific dirt, we'll carry specific dirt. It might not even slow us down," Hoyu added. "Having it might make things run more smoothly later. We just won't know until we try it." Alden thought obstacle course rules for shapers were arbitrary to begin with. Jupiter wanted fresh-cut wood. Maricel wanted soil. There were a set number of life matter bags and sandbags on the course for them to use instead. Jerry could draw from the water obstacle if they were close enough to it, or she could carry water if she wanted it earlier in the course. Which they were doing this time. The water jugs were heavy. But if this were some kind of real-world scenario, Maricel could dig up the earth right outside the building and carry it into the gym with her. Or Jupiter could knock down one of the bottle brush-shaped trees out front and do the same. Making their teams haul their special requests around seemed a little harsh. In the uni-team competitions Alden had viewed over the past couple of days, shapers usually had designated offside areas and weight allowances for their materials. But they were allowed to put anything in there they wanted. I guess this is still class, and the idea is limitations. Vandy's always going to have air around for sky shaping. Maricel and Jupiter will usually have something available, but not necessarily the type of thing they prefer. The countdown for the race appeared, and they all took their positions. Just follow the plan, Alden told himself. See how it goes. Line of asterisks. The race began, and with it, the team's first major strategy shift. "Slowpokes first," Reinhard shouted. Not how Alden would have put it. But yes. Everly, with her glaze object spell, was the best answer for the firebox. 3 casts of it would coat the box in solid ice for several minutes, allowing the rest of the team to break through with 0 movement impairment. That should more than make up for them all getting a slower start. Everly, Jerry, Maricel, and Astrid took off. Jeffy was running with them a second later, carrying a large water jug in each hand. Lucille bent over and allowed Lexi and Hoyu to strap bags of dirt to her back with one of Alden's lengths of cord. "Is that really uncomfortable?" Alden asked, prepping his own dirt for transport with Reinhard's help. "I can take more." Lucille shook her head. He was glad she had it under control. Alden would be carrying 4 bags himself, wrapped in paracord. They wouldn't weigh much thanks to his authority bearing the load, but at a certain point the size became awkward for clearing the hurdles. As it was, if he screwed up he was going to have 300 pounds of dirt instantly smashing him forward into the ground or pulling him backwards off his feet depending on his luck. "Honestly, I'm just grateful none of the faculty are saying it's too dangerous for us to run with this much outside of the gym." Lucille bounded off right as the slowpokes were finishing their first lap. "I hope I tied the nuts right," Hoyu said, watching Lucille spring over a hurdle. "I feel like this is asking a lot of them." "It's fine. Let's go," said Lexi, taking off. The frontrunners of the other team were finished with their second lap. It was enough to send a jolt of anxiety through anyone after last class. The first team with a person over the finish line got to take the first shot. "We'll catch up indoors," Alden reminded himself. "This is the plan." He set off and let himself enjoy the sure-footedness his new word chain provided. It was the same as the first time Lute had given it to him. His body was always moving exactly how he told it to move. It was, he thought, a little like running in a dream. In real life, you often pictured yourself leaping a certain way and landing a certain way only to have to adjust your expectations or recover from an imbalance. With the word chain in effect, the leaps and the landings became an almost eerie match for Alden's mental vision of them. The first few hurdles made him feel like he was on a roll. With the next dozen, he started to have a sense of surreality. He came to the end of his first lap as Fabry was finishing his final one, and he had a view of the agility brute clearing the largest hurdle with movements so fluid they would have put a cat to shame. "I wonder if he feels like this all the time." Fabry had launched himself far enough to land on the other side of the safety mat. No need for cushioning, not a wasted step as he sprinted for the gym. First the track, thought Alden. Then the tube. Then the fire. "It's all going according to plan, everyone," Jerry said. The bellow that Alden had decided must be her coaching voice came through on the team call and echoed toward him from the other side of the windy track at the same time. "Let's put this boring running behind us, and go play with the fun stuff." A breathless cheer went up from Everly, and something like a yodel came from Astrid. Hoyu shouted an enthusiastic yep. As he vaulted over a hurdle. Alden had been pacing himself deliberately so that he'd arrive at the gym behind the obstacle-freezing group as planned, but it was hard not to run a little faster with everyone yelling encouragements in each other's ears. Line of asterisks, line of asterisks. Let's try to determine what the team's strategies are based on what we've seen at this early stage, Instructor Marion said to the half of the class that was on the bleachers waiting their turn to run the course. Talk with your groups. I'll come by to hear your ideas. Obviously dirt is involved for my brother's team, Khan said to his teammates, staring at the live progress of the race through his interface. Lots and lots of dirt. Maricel went to buy all of it in the middle of the night, said Tayet. She said she couldn't sleep. Lexi's flinging that one bag around like it insulted his mum, Finley observed. It's going to burst. Look at how much weight they're carrying for her. Dirt's heavy. I don't see any complaining on Maricel's team. They all turned to Jupiter. The holly hedge you brought isn't happening, said Khan. It's massive and pointy. You've got scratches all over you, and it's obviously stolen. It's still got roots on it. The fact that it has roots on it makes it borrowed, said Jupiter. I can put it back after class. They turned away. You guys. I promise I can put it back. I already bought its special fertilizer. Line of asterisks. Maricel's team has decided to arrange themselves so that the slower members are at the front of the group, Vandy said, folding her hands in her lap and staring avidly at the drone footage. On Wednesday, They were letting the people who could race ahead do it. Today, they've obviously prioritized Everly's abilities for the first indoor obstacles, and possibly they're thinking of her synergy with Jerry. It's likely those two will stick together for the entire course. We'll need to watch what they do and decide if we might want to target one of them and separate them. Marisol may or may not have a specific plan for the clay soil they're carrying. She was disappointed on Wednesday that she was only able to use her simpler shaping abilities. She greatly admires Instructor Fragment because of their similar backgrounds and wants to impress her. The compression point skill she's been practicing allows her to draw ground together and pack it very tightly, but the shapes of her compression points are limited. She uses her left hand for the gestures usually and assigns her right to moving her creations through the air. She's planning to incorporate breath gestures one day. Her range of control is impressive for a new ground shaper already, and, Alden's running faster, Winston said suddenly. Maybe he took something. Vandy blinked at the interruption. What do you mean? I mean like drugs. Why would he need to take drugs to run at the back of their group? Mehdi said in annoyance. He was the third fastest last time. Weren't you paying attention? He's running different now. Winston insisted. Look at him. He's running more like you. Excuse me, but I don't clear hurdles like a rabbit. Marcia rolled her eyes and spoke to Vandy. Why are those two so obsessed with the B rank? Alden's a diligent person, Vandy said. He also has experience in a high-stress environment, so in some ways he is the most proven member of our class. For example, during Soren's accident last night, I've heard he used his powers very calm. Power, Winston interrupted. Singular. Alden has one useful skill. Not multiple. And he's really arrogant. He was talking like he was definitely going to get into the program before the bus even made it here. And you know, they don't accept a lot of people like him. He glanced over at Max, who hadn't spoken yet, and the rest of the team followed his gaze. Confidence isn't a flow as long as it's earned, Vandy said seriously. And Max is also a very diligent student. Max took a sip from his water bottle and said nothing. Well, Vandy hesitated. Maybe you would all like to talk about Shrike's team strategy instead? We could learn something from them. They've trimmed everything holding them back, said Marcia. Our class has too many system experiments and wishful thinkers. It's irritating that we won't get another fight with their team. They are going to be up against Tyet's group next. If I had one more chance at Fabry. Him dodging last time was a fluke. I can hit someone with the instant corner skill. I just need to get the angle of my strike. I really think our team should have attacked them when they were on the bars last time, Vandy said. Focusing on Fabry was, I could have handled Shrike on my own, too, said Marcia. She looked over at Max. Don't save any zones for my assaults today. I want to do them on my own. I don't need you trying to help again. I don't need an underling. Max took another swig from his bottle. He spoke for the first time since leaving the locker room. You can all have exactly what you want. No more complaints from me. Line of asterisks. Alden reached the gym just ahead of Hoyu, moving at a pace that felt too leisurely even if it was all going according to plan so far. Hoyu helped him free himself from his bags of dirt, and almost as soon as the bags hit the floor they lifted up into the air and headed for their master. Now that the dirt was in the gym, any reruns of the track would be unencumbered. You first, Alden said, gesturing at the entrance to the pipe. Hoyu grinned at him. Are you afraid of the tube? You would be too if you were me. Hoyu hit his knees and started to crawl, and Alden followed. Welcome to the workshop. Jerry shouted as they emerged. She was forming a water ball about the size of a grapefruit and holding it out toward Everly. Go through. Go through. Alden almost wanted to linger and examine the workshop, but he couldn't afford to. I know what's going on anyway, he consoled himself as he and Hoyu hurried through the frozen fire obstacle. During the first several minutes of the race, Everly, Jerry, and Marisol would be making things instead of running the course with the rest of them. It had sounded like an odd idea when Everly had presented it. But she wanted to use her spells a lot more, and Jerry felt like her water shaping had gone underutilized as well. So they'd come up with this. If it went like they hoped it would, then they were establishing a secure area in front of the pipe and making resources that would be useful when combat started. "Olive's in the gym," said Reinhard. Eyes on Olive. "She just went in the pipe." "Lexi, I'm heading toward the gym now." "She's not out here," Lexi said. "Confirmed. Olive's really in the pipe. I'll watch for her until you guys reach the top of the rope climb, then Hoyu and I will swap." Alden and Hoyu ran past the weight obstacle, already conveniently moved by Lucille and the others and not yet reset. "Our timing's just right. Now where is everyone?" Alden scanned the parts of the gym he could see from here. Lucille was standing at the bottom of the climbing rope up ahead. That would be her position for a little while. Jeffy had crossed the high bar swings up near the ceiling. Astrid was right behind him. Reinhard was standing on the first bar, staring down at the other team's pipe with a focused expression. On the other side of the course, Ignacio was rapidly carving handholds into the 15-meter wall for his teammates to climb, and Sanjay was climbing them in his wake. Rebecca wasn't visible, but if they were doing it like last time, she was probably already over and in the water. The brute was very boingy when she used her spell impression and her full jumping power. So boingy she sometimes overshot her target or landed wrong. "Looks like they're putting Sanjay over the line first," Alden predicted as he pulled himself hand over hand up the rope. "It could be Rebecca, but I bet they let her stay in play. This word chain is amazing," he thought again as he reached the top and stretched out to grab the bars. When he'd gotten up the rope for the first time on Wednesday, his arms had already been burning a little. Now they weren't. Does having less wasted motion make that much of a difference? He swung past Reinhard, who was still watching the other team's pipe like a hawk. Olive wasn't coming out. She was definitely waiting for the moment when her using her spells would create as much confusion as possible. "We're still putting Astrid over the line first, Alden," Reinhard said. Not a necessary reminder, but it was fine. Got it. Astrid was the obvious choice. She contributed to the team, but in terms of her magic and skill set she didn't contribute anything irreplaceable to the team. So sending her over the finish line and taking her out of play was the option that would cost them the least. I hope she doesn't feel too bad about it. She's always so upbeat, but still. The bar swings were easy enough, like monkey bars if the playground wanted the monkeys to fall to their deaths. The psychological impact of the height was actually worse than the physical effort required. Alden swung his body and flew a short distance. Thanks to the word chain, he was abnormally aware of the flow of air across his skin even as his hands wrapped around the final bar. Lute had told him it was a chain that you learn to use better with practice, and he could see that it was true. There was a mental shift he would need to get used to. His body on the word chain moved differently, so he'd have to learn to make decisions that utilized it appropriately. And then know how to switch expectations for myself when I'm not using it. He pulled himself up onto the narrow metal perch at the end of the bars, then looked down. A semi-opaque barrier separated this obstacle from the next at ground level, and the only way you were allowed to move through it according to the rules was to enter through a specific gap in the barrier you accessed by traveling down a narrow metal beam. It stabbed toward the floor at a steep angle, so walking down it wasn't an option unless you had a good spell for it. Sliding wouldn't kill you if you could manage it without falling, but they'd gotten some sprains and a broken tailbone experimenting with it on their previous runs, which slowed them down. Alden dropped a length of cord on the perch for whoever might need it, then lowered himself carefully onto the beam, stomach pressed to the metal and butt pointed toward the floor like a sane person. Not like Jeffy, who refused to be persuaded that rocketing groundward headfirst was harder even if you could see where you were going. "Slide, stop, slide, stop," Reinhard called, passing his pipe-watching task off to Hoyu and swinging across the bars toward Alden. Again. Unnecessary. But I guess it's kind of nice to have the call-outs to remind everyone what's going on. Alden relaxed his arms and legs to loosen his grip on the beam, slid rapidly downward, regripped before he could pick up too much momentum, and repeated the process all the way through the gap in the barrier and to the floor. He rolled backward and sprang to his feet, untying the next section of cord as he ran to join Astrid and Jeffy at the base of the white, 15-meter wall. The gym-created obstacle was smooth as glass, and to Alden it felt hard as a rock, though the Meisters could pierce it, and Lucille could gouge chunks out of it bare-handed if she didn't care about the damage she had taken in the process. "Alden. I'm ready." Jeffy waved at him. "Boost us up. This man's ready to swim." Astrid was still trying to highlight the joys of aquatic work at every opportunity. "You remember how we do this?" Alden asked, hanging on to one end of the cord as he dropped the rest of the coil onto the floor. This length was still entrusted to him, and it would stay that way as long as he didn't take his hands off the end of it. He hurried backwards, grateful that the wall had a run-up zone in front of it that he could use this way. "I hold onto Astrid, not the magic rope," Jeffy announced. "Right." Alden stopped backing away when there were 5 coils of cord left in the pile beside Jeffy. This piece had been pre-measured for the task, so it should be long enough. He bent, preserved, and lifted. The cord stiffened, and the coiled end rose from the floor 50 feet away. As usual, the strain on his authority was surprisingly high when he was preserving at a distance. There was now a hoop of coiled cord on the end of a straight length. "Reinhard, should we wait on you?" he asked. "Don't," the archer said overcomes. "I'll go up separately. Everyone, check in. Workshop is good." Jerry called. "Maricel has a really great idea. For second attack if we time it right." "Olive's still in the pipe," Hoyu announced. "The weights have reset," Lucille said. "Remember we're moving those again as soon as Sanjay hits the final obstacle." Jerry called. "Lexi, you're up on bars with a view of everything. What's the state of the rest of their team?" "Shrike's on the wall monitoring our progress. Fabri, Sanjay, and Rebecca are finishing up the water obstacle. Heloisa's started shifting their weights again, and they've got a couple of people climbing the wall." "Okay, let's move, everybody. We'll catch up to them in the water." "Thanks to Jeffy," shouted Astrid. "Thanks to Jeffy," Alden agreed. Ready to lift. He felt a jolt of excitement and nerves. The obstacle course itself was easily doable as a team. When the attacks started, that was when things got a lot more complicated. "Tell me if you start to have some kind of a problem on the way up," Alden ordered as he lowered his hoop over Jeffy's head. The Aqua Brute stuck out his arms toward Astrid, and as Alden lifted, the paracord caught Jeffy under the armpits and picked his feet up off the ground. Astrid hopped up and grabbed him in a full-body bear hug, her arms going over the cord and around his back, her legs wrapping around his waist. The paracord was stuck between them now. "That's actually more thorough than what we discussed," Alden thought, lifting them slowly higher and watching them closely to make sure they weren't about to change positions and slip. As long as Astrid didn't lose her grip, there should be no way for them to fall. He approved. Jeffy seemed alarmed, but not in a bad way. His feet kicked wildly and his eyes were wide, but he wrapped his arms around Astrid as they rose. "All right," Alden said. "Shout if you need anything." "Higher. Faster," yelled Astrid. "Let's win." "Yeah," Jeffy said. Alden resisted the urge to oblige them. For one thing, their body weight was being entirely supported by a fairly narrow hoop instead of a proper harness, and even if Jeffy was a tough dude, it was probably uncomfortable. For another, speed at the end of the line wasn't the easiest thing to judge if he rushed. As Fragment had warned Alden when he was practicing rescues in a similar fashion, small wrist movements at his end of the preserved cord resulted in much larger swings on the far end. Catapulting them across the gym wouldn't be very friendly of me. "That looks just as neat as the first time I saw it," Everly said from her spot at the workshop as Astrid and Jeffy reached the top of their arcade like he's got a stranged balloon. "I am the stranged balloon," Astrid crowed. "Sanjay just hit the final obstacle. Move those weights, Lucille." "Wow. People are getting excited in the bleachers. I see them pointing." There was a noise barrier up between the runners and the audience. Alden was grateful for that. Once his excited passengers were 50 feet up in the air and more or less vertically oriented, He just walked over to the base of the wall with them. Jeffy, let go of her, but keep the cord under your arms. Astrid, you should be able to drop onto the top of the wall easily. He paused, then added, don't miss. Astrid was on her feet on top of the wall a second later, and Jeffy was right behind her. He whooped then dove off the back. A splash announced his landing in the water tank, and Astrid followed him. Good job. Reinhard shouted, running up toward Alden with Lexi right behind him. Get me up there, too, so I can get ready to snipe. Alden kept his cord preserved, ran back to where he'd started from last time, and dropped the hoop for Reinhard. The archer opted to wrap his arms and legs around it and dangle upside down like a tree sloth. Let's go, let's go. Jerry was shouting. It's almost time. Thanks for being my bodyguard, Alden said to Lexi while he lifted the sloth into the air, pausing briefly when it looked like Reinhard needed to adjust his position. Lexi had his back turned to Alden, and Ruther was long and at the ready as he watched the other team's half of the course. They've put Rebecca back on top of their wall. She's on watch replacing Shrike. I can't see him from here, so he's got to be back on the floor, getting ready for attack. Fabri's heading for the ground again, too. Fabri Shrike used their S ranks for attack, though they'd let Eloisa and Rebecca have a turn last time when it became obvious that they were pulling ahead of Alden's team. All the other teams used their S ranks as primary attackers. For good reason. I think if it's Shrike I might be able to stop him from doing too much damage to you, said Lexi. If it's Fabri. It's fine. Shit happens. Alden forced himself not to fling Reinhard toward the ceiling faster out of nerves. Everly, get to freezing, Reinhard said from overhead. They might go for you instead of Alden. Lucille, you're probably their third choice. Olive's in the pipe, Hoyu said. If she stays in there, let me take first attack. Maricel called. Jeffy's got me through the water. Astrid shouted. I'm heading for the finish. An aqua brute really does make that obstacle fast. A bell rang. The lights on the other half of the course lit up. The invisible barrier that separated the two sides gave a warning flare then dropped. The other team was now allowed to cross over for the purpose of making a single attack or messing around with one of the obstacles using either their powers or an obstacle modification template that lay at the entrance to each of the pipes. Resetting the weights could screw a team over big time if their strongest members were over the finish line. Resetting the wall so that the handholds teams had created were removed was also an option. Worskop is protecting the tablet and Everly. Maricel called. I'm on Alden, Lexi reported. I'll go with Astrid to protect her. Jeffy said. No. Reinhard and Jerry spoke over each other. You're staying in the water, remember? Reinhard said as Alden carried him toward the wall at a fast walk. You stay there unless we need you to run back. Jerry agreed. Oh, that's right. Jeffy sounded mournful. Reinhard made it onto the top of the wall. He crouched low and used the vantage point to scan the course. Relieved he'd gotten some critical teammates into position in time, Alden dropped preservation, and let his cord fall in a scrambled heap at his feet. Hastily towing the mess into a slightly more cohesive shape, he picked it all up together. It made a small, handheld shield with lots of holes in it. But it only took seconds. What are you going to do with that? Lexi asked without looking back over his shoulder. They might not send their S's. I should be able to take a hit from the others. You never know. It was inconvenient to have any member of their team sent back to the track or heavily injured and movement restricted. But some of them were particularly juicy targets. Incapacitating Maricel, Lucille, or Jeffy would be a real triumph for their enemies. But Fabri Shrike probably wouldn't try it. Maricel was over by the pipe and the frozen box, which would provide her with a lot of shelter. The giant scent bags she had on hand also served her as both weapons and shields. Jeffy was, hopefully, underwater. Getting into the tank and successfully attacking him there would be nearly impossible for anyone on the Fabri Shrike team. Lucille was more vulnerable, but she didn't come across that way while she was trotting back and forth with metric ton weights. We're lucky they don't know she doesn't want to lethally hit people. It really limits her options for responding. The other teams didn't seem to realize it yet anyway. For now, the risk of not taking Lucille down in a single hit and getting backhanded to the moon by a retaliatory strike was probably going to keep attackers from getting within an easy arm's reach of her. If enemies didn't go for the S's, Alden and Everly were the next most appealing victims. Everly was protected by Maricel, so the most likely place for them to attack was here. Here I am, both breakable and useful to the team. And Alden's body wasn't the only thing that was breakable. The way his skill worked gave him an additional exploitable weakness for this kind of game. Don't shield against a hit if you're not sure how strong it is, Lexi said, keeping himself between Alden and any possible incoming threats. I know. The next run, I know. I'm the one who pointed out that my own death would technically be more helpful than me trying to protect myself sometimes. Alden's skill was stronger than anyone here knew, and if he was right with his theorizing, it was more versatile and potent than it might have been in a normal B-rank rabbit's hands. But some of his classmates could still magically overwhelm him in one strike and put him out of commission for the rest of class. It just depended on which classmates they were and what the strike was. And beyond that, there was compounding fatigue to consider. Their current strategy called for Alden doing as many of these high lifts as were necessary to get people over the wall. Depending on how many deaths and reruns they suffered, it could be quite a few. If he fatigued his skill, Maricel would take over or they'd start climbing the much more tiring and slow way. But it was best if Alden stayed available for the length of this run and the next. Which meant he should only use his messy little shield here to soak attacks if doing so wouldn't be too costly or render him useless later. If it's February, should I try? He could, blink at just the wrong moment and a miracle could happen. But how hard does he hit compared to someone like Aloysia? If it's Febreze over the line. Febreze over the line. Heading for the workshop. Reinhard's call was excited. Lucille, stop. Olives out of the pipe. Hoyu announced at the same time. And another olives out of the pipe. And a third. I'm almost to the finish line. Astrid said. Hanging there. Hoyu, Reinhard, try to determine which one is the real olive. Lucille, run toward February. Grab him. Maricel, guard. Jerry's instructions were delivered so rapidly that it would have been hard to interpret them if it wasn't fairly well planned in advance. Alden and Lexi both ran over to an opening in the wall, about 2 bodies wide, that connected this part of their team's course to the previous one so that people who'd completed the bars and gone down the beam could run back to the old obstacles to help teammates with them. It was a one-way situation. You could use this shortcut to rapidly backtrack, but once you'd backtracked, you were required to return the hard way. This was also a spot where people waiting to go up the wall could see what was happening, and where attackers, who didn't have to obey obstacle order rules on the enemy course, could come through. Now that they knew February was the attacker and he was going in the other direction, it was safe to take a peek. Lucille and February were facing off in front of the final, cube-shaped weight. She crouched. Her arms were wide, and she was poised to spring and grab February. But the agility brute bounced once on the balls of his feet, finted down and to the right, then leaped up and to the left so fast that by the time Lucille had started to move to intercept him in the fake-out direction, he was already airborne, turning an unnecessary but very cool-looking flip as he sailed toward the frozen workshop area. Lexi was standing at the edge of the line they weren't allowed to cross without it being deemed an official backtrack, but rather was stretching out over it toward February, twitching angrily. Alden chose not to comment on that. They were way too far away for Lexi to reach the S rank with a whip. I bet he's smiling, Lexi hissed. You can tell by how he bounces around that he's smiling. Not for long, Maricel said quietly over comms. It was really nice of them to go for Everly first, thought Alden. Kind of impractical considering she had 2 companions to Alden's one. I guess they thought they could get away with taking a closer look at what we were doing over there. He felt a little smug about what was going to happen, and then 2 bells rang and both sides of the course flashed again. I'm over the finish line. Astrid shouted. And another one of theirs is, too. Lexi and Alden stared at each other. "Shrike," they both said. A moment later, they spotted him. Ignacio was running toward them fast, shouting instructions to his own teammates in Spanish, and wearing a chef's knife roll bag on each shoulder in addition to his system-gifted Meister daggers, one in each hand, pointed straight ahead of him. A pair of arrows zinged through the air one after the other. Reinhard was allowed to shoot as much as he wanted at interlopers on their half of the course. But judging by the swearing, he had missed Fabry. He wouldn't be aiming for Shrike. The S-rank had taken an unusual skill, and in addition to its offensive uses, it neatly countered Reinhard's arrows. It was up to Lexi to deal with him. "Hoyu," said Reinhard, keeping his voice low. "Which olive is real?" "Don't know yet. Sorry." She's improved her realism now that she knows what the course is like. "Best guess is the middle one." A lot of things happened all at once. It was a familiar chaos after Wednesday's runs, but Alden still couldn't quite believe how fast it all moved when the attacks started. He let the mini-shield, too small to be useful versus Ignacio's favorite attack, unravel. He started recoiling the end of it to make his teammate lifting shape as he got out of the Knife Meister's sight and pressed himself to the barrier. Lexi was standing boldly in the opening, ready to intercept, rather curling through the air in front of him threateningly. "Taking our attack shot," Reinhard was saying. "Aiming for one of their wall climbers since we don't know where Olive is." Alden listened. Running footsteps paused as Ignacio considered his options. "Lexi wants me to attack him instead of Alden." Greater than he shouted to his teammates. An arrow flew toward its target. "Got the climber." Reinhard sounded gleeful. A shattering, popping noise came from the workshop, followed by a yelp. "Fibri." Greater than rather lashed out. There was swearing in Spanish. Alden poked his head out from behind the wall for just long enough to see that the whip had grabbed Ignacio by the leg and yanked him off balance. His knife rolls were open on the floor beside him. He was struggling against the whip for now, but if he just stopped and turned around. Alden dropped the coil of paracord he'd just made behind Lexi and ran backwards, putting the partition between him and Shrike again and unspooling his rope just like he had to put Jeffy up the wall. Shrike tried to turn toward the workshop. Lexi was calling for the team's benefit. Ruther's got him, but he hasn't attacked, and he still has his arms free to step backward, Lexi. Alden shouted, sending a mental text to enforce the message simultaneously. One step backward. Step backward. It was just a crazy, last-second scheme. Something he attempted because the idea popped into his head, and in the haze of the fight he couldn't see any immediate drawbacks. Getting the timing right was at least 90% luck. Lexi taking a step backward was probably more a response to what was happening with the enemy in front of him than to Alden's command. But he did step backward. Right into the center of the prepared loop behind him. "Grab the rope!" Alden yelled, preserving and pushing the cord straight up over his head. It caught Lexi under his extended arm, and an instant after his feet had left the ground, his other was hooked over it. Alden lifted his roommate much too fast for safety and just fast enough that the bulk of Ignacio's attack missed him. One of the Knife Meister's blades, glowing a dark, burning orange, shot below Lexi's feet and every sharp object in Shrike's vicinity followed it. The leading knife skill. Alden hadn't been familiar with it until he'd seen his classmate use it. Most knife-throwing avowed seemed to pride themselves on pinpoint accuracy, power, and weapon spell effects more similar to Tiet's darts. But the leading knife made any sufficiently knife-like object within the user's range orient to point in the same direction as Shrike's lead blade. Reinhard was particularly miffed about the existence of a skill that made even his strongest arrows rotate in the wrong direction as they approached their target. And once the lead blade left Shrike's hand, all of those servant blades chased it like a flock of birds. The mundane blades were confined to quite a large spherical area behind the Throne Meister weapon, though it was hard to make out the shape unless there were a lot of weapons in the air at once. It was a great skill for turning a person or whole groups of people into pincushions. A large knife at the top of the flock smashed into Lexi's shins before Alden had him fully out of range, then kept going. But they missed the worst of it. and Ignacio was dangling off the floor now, legs still caught by Ruther. Lexi was staring down at him with dignity and focus befitting a person who wasn't barely hanging on to his uncomfortable perch by his armpits. "I think his leg is probably missing," he was murmuring to himself so quietly that it only came through comms. "That's good. A little fall now. No more attacking." Ruther phased out and returned to its normal size. As Shrike stood up with the stiff motions of someone enduring a serious movement penalty, Lexi called, "Shrike's seriously injured, but I don't think he'll die. Let's let him go. He'll slow them down." Shrike looked back over his shoulder and grimaced. Then he sighed and started hopping away from them on one foot. "Wait. Why am I up in the air?" Alden stared up as Lexi's expression turned shocked and he scrambled to throw a leg over the hoop to make himself more secure. "You didn't know?" Alden asked, baffled. "My weapon requires concentration." "You did amazing, then," Alden said. "I was going really fast and you held on great. What's wrong with my leg?" "You got stabbed on the way up. It shouldn't be too bad." "He's stabbed." "Good." Jerry called. "Why is that good?" "Because we need someone over the line right now, and he's close enough to make it to the finish if he's only slightly injured." "Alden, get him over the wall." "Jeffy, get him through the water." "Hoyu, I think I know which Olive is real now." "Keeping my eyes on her." "Thank God," said Reinhard. "That anti-targeting spell she is shouldn't be allowed in combination with the illusions." "You guys." Everly sounded excited. "Do you realize what just happened?" There was a pause. Alden grinned. "We injured their S-ranks. We repelled 2 attacks and got one of our own. The plan's working," Everly said. "What happened over there?" Lexi asked. "I'll tell you all about it after the game," Jerry said. "Now hurry. Up you go," Alden called, lifting his strange balloon higher into the air. Chapter 126 Now my brother's flying. "He looks happy." "I think he looks a bit bored," said Finley, watching Lexi cling to a hoop of fluorescent yellow paracord that was swinging him upwards in a steady arc toward the top of the wall. Especially for a person dangling from a string that high in the air. "No, that's one of his happy faces." Khan was standing. "Look at the drone view footage and zoom in instead of watching from here. There's this tiny smirk." Despite the fact that their class filled only a small fraction of the bleachers, voices echoed around the gym, competing with the shouts of the people on the floor. As soon as the first players had made it over the finish line, the tension had started to build. Khan wasn't the only one who'd been driven to his feet by nerves or excitement. Fibri, man. How could you walk into a trap that obvious? Someone on the other waiting team, sitting in a group together several meters away, was shouting. Another person groaned. Shrike wasted that attack. He wasted it. He's an S-rank Meister. He should have gotten both of them. "It's a good thing they can't hear us down there," Khan said. Tayeb winced. "I wish people wouldn't assume Meisters and S-ranks were flawless at this game. It's so stressful." "You know it's partially your fault, right?" Khan said. "Me? How?" "You just stand up there on the wall, demolishing the other teams one dart at a time. Raising the bar higher for the other Meisters." Down on the course, Lexi reached the top of said wall, and Reinhard gave him a hand. "He's limping," said Khan, as his brother stepped past the length of extra paracord that Alden had sent up with Astrid earlier. Lexi dove into the water tank. Movement restriction from that knife he took to the shin. It would have been much worse than a restriction if Alden hadn't yoinked him up into the air right then, said Jupiter. "By the way, why can't we have a crafting castle? Maricel gets a crafting castle. They are calling it a workshop, aren't they?" "I think that's what they shouted," said Finley. "What would you craft, Jupiter?" Tayed asked. "Picture a wall of spiky protectors made of plant life. When the enemy approached, they would leap to your defense. Some noble flora. Like holly maybe." They all groaned. Instructor Marion had been down on the floor having a quick discussion with Principal Soleil and Instructor Klein. He headed toward their group. "I think," said Khan, "we're having too much fun. I bet he wants us to analyze what just happened with a strategic mindset. Quick. Someone think up something smart to say about the trap the girls set. Oh, I've done that already, Jupiter announced. Here are my notes. They all tapped the in front of them to accept the message she had just sent. Asterisk crafting castle. Crafting castle for killing? Crafting castle of maiming artists, Maricel S. ground shaper, Everly ice spells, Jerry a water shaper materials, bags of dirt reminder. I owe Mari potting soil because I borrowed some without telling her. Sand emptied from 120 kilograms sandbags. Water happenings. 1. Everly uses multiple casts of glaze object to turn the fire obstacle into a frozen box. Her eyeshadow is blue today. 2. Maricel creates a large, thin rectangle out of dirt. Excellent shaping. They use glaze object again to ice the rectangle over. Water and ground elements and balance mean it should be movable by both Maricel and Jerry. 3. After all of their teammates have passed through the obstacle, the artists move the ice dirt rectangle into position over the exit of the frozen box, making the interior invisible from the enemy course. I would like a similar fort on our next run. 4. Drone footage shows artists rapidly crafting small solid ice balls. X11. A large dirt ball glazed with ice X1, and a large, highly compressed cylinder of clay and sand X1, still in progress. I think these all have multiple potential uses. They are making whatever their team might need. 5. Sanjay crossed the finish line. I bet the artists are disappointed it happened so soon, forcing them to halt their crafting, but they leap into action at the sound of the enemy bell. Jerry and Maricel are fleeing the fortress. Going into the pipe. Don't forget Everly. Why are you leaving her? Ice balls, sand, and dirt follow them into the pipe. 6. That's a lot of sand, Mari. Some might say a greedy amount. How much do you need in there? 7. Fabri is the attacker. He's going to attack Alden probably. He should have waited until Alden had someone up in the air again. That's what I would have done. 8. No. Fabri is obviously too curious about the crafting team to resist. He is assaulting the castle instead. 9. Lucille tries to intercept and tackle, but she's too slow. I think she could have moved faster than that. 10. It's a cannon. 11. I was right. I realized it was a cannon before Fabri did. He tried to enter the frozen fort to attack Everly, not knowing she had just cast her extra slippery ice trap. It only slowed him down for a second, but a second was enough. Everly ducked behind the sphere and cylinder crafts the shapers left in the fort. Then, Maricel used her maximum power to push all of the sand and the ice balls out of the pipe at high speed. Very high speed. I am sure I was the inspiration for this attack. One cannonball hit Fabri in the shoulder. While he was suffering a blinding penalty from all the sand, Everly escaped the fort through the shattered back pane and ran for Lucille's protection. Jerry climbed out of the pipe and smashed some of the ice from the fort's ceiling and walls on top of Fabri. The fire jets restarted. Battered, burned, and overwhelmed, he opted for retreat. But I'm sure he didn't mind since he got to see the hard work of these dedicated artists in person. They deserve to celebrate their victory, but instead, they must rescue the remaining creations from the flames. Final thoughts. Establishing a protected base on the indoor course was smart. The location they chose was perfect, and it has the benefit of protecting the object creation tablet located at the end of the pipe. Protecting the tablet limits the enemy's methods of assault. Their success proves that the hero program should accept a higher percentage of shapers. I volunteer to be on this team for their next run. The addition of a life shaper to their group would be educational for all of us. And I believe Alden Thurin would be happy to help me carry my preferred supplies. Unlike some people. Line of asterisks. Vandy Carrison leaned forward with her hands on her knees, watching the teams below her avidly. The assault on Lexi and Alden might have gone differently if Shrike hadn't been distracted by what happened to Fabri. He obviously wanted to assist his teammate, but turning his back on Lexi was a mistake. I wonder if he misjudged the range of Mindbreather. She turned to Marcia. I also wonder what Fabri's strategy was. Maybe he thought getting a look at Maricel, Jerry, and Everly's position was worth the risk. Or he assumed that his agility and his skill would allow him to escape no matter what he found. He didn't account for the time they'd had to prepare. He probably just wanted to take out Maricel, Marcia said. He could have if she didn't have double backup. She's not quick enough to stop his subclass. There's no reason to be scared of her in a one-on-one fight. You think all the S-ranks are as focused on each other as you are on them, Mehdi said with a snort. Do you even know the names of the other members of our class? Don't take it personally, Mehdi, Marcia said dryly. I don't have anything against your ranks. I just don't see the point in these mixed combat classes. I train better against stronger opponents, and they train better against me. She stood. Her polearm, in its glaive form, lay on the bench beside her. She lifted it and tipped its head toward the runners on course. This is a game. You know it's a game because Shrike lost versus the rabbit and the whip boy. One attack at a time. I guess it makes us learn to plan better, but it's nothing like a real duel. In superlatives, our practice fights are completely different. Mehdi crammed his lips together as if he had no intention of continuing the conversation. But then, half a minute later, he asked, how are they different? Marcia smiled at him. When Shrike really fights, he throws one of his Meister knives like you just saw. His blade collection follows it. Then, he recalls while the lead knife is still in the air, and all the knives turn to chase it back to him. The second he catches it, he whips it in a different direction, before any of the following knives have the chance to fall. He can keep them airborne for ages. Like he is directing a swarm around the battlefield. Here, he's not allowed to do that because it counts as more than one attack. She let the butt of her weapon thump against the bleacher. Duels will be different. I'm sure they'll make it S on S and A on A, so don't worry about it. Mehdi sat up straighter. I wasn't worried about. He chose a stupid color for his rope. Winston was on his feet with his arms crossed over his chest, watching Alden Thorne greet Hoyu Zhangdamir as the brute rolled off the beam into his section of the obstacle course. How much of an idiot do you have to be to bring neon yellow rope? It's like he's saying, look at me. Look at me. Attack right here. Maybe bright colors help him visualize what he's doing more clearly, Vandy suggested. I'm sure for some things he needs to see exactly where the tip of the line is. He's been using dark green a lot until now. Mehdi squinted down at Alden. Maybe he ran out of it and had to grab the neon stuff on the way out the door. Marcia stared at them. Why are you two memorizing the B-Rank's rope colors? What's wrong with you? If you need to fight him when we go up against them, dodge the rope. You're an Aji and a speedster. You can handle that much, can't you? And hit him. Or kick him. It's not that hard. Huh? Said Max. Vandy was the only person on the team who looked over at him. He smiled at her and shrugged. A bell rang. Whip boys over the finish line, Marcia said. And this game is basically done. Line of asterisks. This is going entirely too well, thought Alden as the bell rang. Surely we're about to run into some trouble. The weights had been moved for what might be the last time if nothing went wrong. Lucille was climbing the rope with Jerry on her back to speed things along. And Everly was refreezing the fire obstacle for what was definitely the last time. She'd need to save plenty of cash for their next run. And it was their turn to take an attack. My plan is an obstacle modification, Maricel was saying. It should slow them down a lot. I'm almost ready. I'll cross the finish line next, Jerry said. As soon as I'm over, Reinhard will take out Olive. She's their slowest runner. If you're sure you picked the right one earlier, Hoyu. I've kept an eye on the one he pointed out, Reinhard said. She's the one sitting on the platform at the end of the bar swings. I can't tell any difference between them, and I have enhanced vision. If he's wrong we'll be wasting the shot. No pressure or anything, Hoyu murmured beside Alden. They stood in the opening Lexi had defended from Shrike a short while ago, looking across their course toward what they could see of the opposing team's side. Hoyu was trying to view the three identical girls in hot pink sweatbands from a different angle than Reinhard, in hopes of noticing something else. She glanced up with a curious expression earlier, he told the team. It was only a second, but it didn't look like one of those pre-planned actions she gives the illusions to make them more realistic. I think she was distracted by Alden flying Lexi through the air like a kite. Alden didn't reply. Instead, he was watching the olives. 2 on the bars. 1 sitting on top of their team's wall. All very temptingly arranged and easy to shoot. The adjuster would need help from a second teammate out on the track, so she was an obvious person to send all the way back to start. But she was good with her illusions, and after running the course on Wednesday, she had gone from good to incredible. From what little Alden understood about her power, the illusionary girls moved over obstacles and struggled realistically because Olive had been able to craft them based on memories of these specific tasks instead of relying on general memories of her body and motion to do it. She even had a spell to prevent people from targeting her. Alden still knew which one was real. He had realized he knew how to tell last time, and he'd been trying to decide how to be fair about it ever since. Ask me, he thought. Ask me which one I think it is. This was what he'd settled on. He'd find Olive for his team if he was assigned to find Olive. If someone directly asked, he would pick her out and pretend he just had a feeling she was the right one. Otherwise, he'd act clueless. It would be mean to repeatedly screw her over in a way nobody could possibly have a defense against. And I'll have to make up excuses for how I knew every time. When people correctly identified Olive, she asked them how at the end of class. So that she could improve. Alden could only use it was luck and not sure, maybe I noticed something subconsciously so many times before she thought she had some subtle tell he wasn't revealing and started to agonize over it. I'm almost positive I picked the right one, Hoyu told the team. Second guessing doesn't do any good unless we see some sign. He was right. Alden knew because the gremlin said that particular Olive was a no-no. Alden couldn't eat her without her permission. What are you sighing for in the middle of an epic battle of magic and wits? Hoyu was raising an eyebrow. I wish I was less weird sometimes. Before Hoyu could reply, Maricel said, ready. She sounded excited. With Aloysius' positioning right now, I think I can do even better. I'll have to start farther from the target, though. And once I've made the shaping gesture that qualifies as the official attack, Principal Sley will give us a penalty if I make another gesture to adjust my dirt's position. I might miss. Maybe I shouldn't try for more if it's risk. Always try for more, said Astrid from her spot at the finish line. I agree, Jerry said. Give Victory her sustenance. If you all don't mind. Okay. A moment passed, and then Maricel came into view. She jogged up the ramp at the end of the weight challenge. She didn't have any dirt with her. Yet. Do you know what she's doing? Hoyu asked Alden. I don't. We talked about knocking people off the top of their wall with sandbags, but it's obviously not going to be that. Shrike was headed for the wall again. He would probably perch there with his severed leg for a couple of minutes, hoping they would get careless and knock him off so that he could get a fresh start. The other team was cautious. They knew an attack was incoming. They just didn't know what it would be or who would deliver it. Reinhard had an arrow knocked, and that was drawing most of their attention toward him. Maricel was pretending like she was just repositioning herself. She wasn't looking toward the enemy team at all, not even Eloisa, who was shifting her weight from foot to foot and staring at Reinhard like she fully intended to dodge an arrow if it came her way. She was grinning eagerly. She knows I'm an about, too, doesn't she? He groused. I'm not a kid playing with a toy bow, and she is not Fabri. Don't shoot her just to prove you can, Hoyu said. It's not your turn. Alden watched Maricel. Good luck, he thought as she suddenly stopped and lifted her arms. You've been doing great since school started. Get them. Everything had gotten better since Maricel Alcantara left intake. She had never expected it, and she still couldn't quite believe it was happening. But for the past 2 weeks, a lot of the good things that had been stolen from her the moment the system chose her seemed to be coming back to her all at once. They were slightly different than before, this island's version of those good things rather than identical replacements for what she had lost, but she still recognized them. Friends. School. teachers. Until 6 months ago, Maricel had had those. She'd always been welcome among the other girls her age back home. She looked forward to seeing them every day and being with them. Not as the most popular or exciting person, but as a comfortable background character in their world. Right after her family had made her register, she'd gone back to her junior high for what she had thought would be a final week of classes and a chance to say goodbye to everyone. That was what she had been told it would be by her handler, the about immigration people, and all those other adults who'd started buzzing around her the moment she'd been announced as a newly selected S. Instead, the week had been more of a big celebration. Supposedly, it was all in her honor, but she had soon realized that although her name was everywhere, none of what had been planned was intended to make things better for her. Lots of people needed their piece of the earthquake that had shaken the foundations of her life. Let this news crew film you during lunchtime, Maricel. You won't even know they're around. Make sure you smile. Be happy for the reporter. And there's an interview tomorrow. You're so lucky. Everyone is so curious. No, you don't have to, but it's already arranged. Think of the community, the school, everything we've done for you. Would it really be so hard? A girl in your position should be grateful. Now come here and stand beside this important stranger for the camera. Then this other one. Just one more. She felt like she was being spun around in circles for days, and then just like that, it was over. They'd had their fun, they'd gotten an avowed fairy tale story, and the school didn't really want to manage an S rank in class. She would be a hazard and a distraction, and she was required to have her handler with her at all times around large groups of people. So inconvenient for everyone. Parents would complain. There was a farewell assembly on the last day. It was all right for her to cry then. It was touching if she cried after the celebration was over. People said that if she became famous, they might name the school she was no longer allowed to attend after her. She went home with a brand new computer, donated by a local company that wanted a picture of her wearing a shirt with their logo on it, so that she could sit in her bedroom having online classes. Safely tucked out of everyone else's way until she was banished to Nzidora. Even she thought it was for the best, since she wanted to spend as much time with her family as possible. But maybe not. Maybe listening to conversations through her door and imagining how in the future her name would be spoken less and less in the house until she didn't really belong there anymore had been bad for her. Then in intake, lots of the new arrivals were sad just like her. But they snapped out of it. So fast. And they wanted to leave the sad behind. And there she was, still going through boxes of tissues and trying to find ways to get back home. I guess I really will have to be famous enough for them to name a school after me, she'd decided. I guess I'll just have to be one of those avowed who can break mountains. I'll have to look pretty and smile for cameras and shake hands with strangers. And if I do that for them, they will let me stay. It was her ray of hope. It also made her so furious that she wanted to rip up the floor of the sea. She practiced with her powers so that she could one day. In intake, she learned that a girl with an S beside her name was supposed to be grateful, even here. She was supposed to complain less than everyone else, not more. Only the other gloomy, furious people thought she had a right to her unhappiness. So she'd hung around them a little. It wasn't really friendship. Just shared misery and resentment. It seemed natural to hang around people who felt the same way, she thought as she stood inside the Rafe Rosen workshop. She carefully targeted points within and around the big cylinder she had built for the team. She used her hands, her skills, and the curious mental focus her active spell impression gave her to direct her magic. But it just made it harder to move on. Things weren't perfect, and yet they had been getting better ever since she got away from intake. And telling Jacob, once and for all, that she wouldn't go with him if he tried to leave again had relieved some pressure she hadn't realized was crushing her. She hoped he'd talk to the system, like Alden had suggested, and tell it he wanted to be summoned. Trying to escape from Nzidora that way sounded much safer and more likely to succeed. But as for Maricel, she was here now. On this path home. She had to start walking it. She packed more clay into her cylinder. More sand. She pressed and pressed. A slightly wrong motion or a misplaced compression point, and her magic would break the shape apart instead of hardening it. Mistakes weren't usually a problem. It was only dirt. But today she was nervous. I don't want to disappoint them all. It's been so much fun. The long hours at the library, having everyone on calls with her in class, even teasing Vandy and Tyet this morning before they'd left the apartment. Everly had been joking that their team had spent all their time coming up with surefire methods to counter Dartmeisters and Sky Shapers specifically, and Maricel had gone along with her. Tyet had threatened to pin pictures of them to her dartboard in retaliation. I like being on the team. After their terrible runs on Wednesday, she had thought they might fall apart. She had been sure Alden must feel terrible after getting targeted so many times. But he'd been calm and collected starting off their meeting, and it had just gotten better from there. I wish we could run the course together more. We could get so good at it. They only had today. She wanted to make it count. And she wanted to impress Fragment, who was watching from the stands. The older ground shaper saved people from disasters with her power. She had two brothers several years younger than her, just like Maricel. She had been forced to leave them behind when she was 15, just like Maricel. And I never suspected, she had said, offering Maricel a coconut taffy from the tin she kept on her desk, that one day the younger one would be selected, too. I was so glad I'd gotten my feet under me by then. I'd just bought my first apartment. Didn't even have a spare bedroom, but he moved in with me the day he arrived on the island. Siblings of Globy Avowed didn't usually become avowed, too. But it happened much more often for them than it did for the general population. You never know. Maricel Alcantara was trying to get her feet back under her for a lot of reasons. She quit shaping and looked down at the large tube she'd made. She'd had to use more sand than she wanted, but with the slightly damp clay and the intense compression it should hold together well enough until it reached its destination. Great, said Everly from where she stood watching. That should really frustrate them. Ready. Maricel called to the rest of the team. A few moments later, heart racing with nerves, she was hurrying down the course. Her shaping attacks on the other team needed to be either massive or very accurate to be effective. She was allowed to move something into position on their side for just a few seconds, and then she could make a single gesture to direct it towards someone or something in an aggressive fashion. Otherwise shapers could just fly their element around for ages without committing to a proper attack, creating an extended threat that would interfere with the other team's ability to maneuver. She stopped just past the weight ramp. She glanced toward Reinhard. He was distracting the other team for her. Heloisa was looking at him. Maricel eyeballed the other girl's position, almost directly opposite her own. I think I can do it. I think she's standing in exactly the right spot. But it's going to have to be really fast to catch her by surprise. She lifted her arms. Maintain shape with the left hand. 3 gestures with the right, she thought. To me, away from me, down the enemy course. If I'm not accurate, it's going to be very embarrassing. But Astrid had just said they should always try for more. There's all of our dirt. Hoyu said. It's moving really fast, said Alden. Holy. A large tube of dirt flew through the air toward Maricel. People shouted. Her right hand pressed forward as the cylinder shot over her head, and its direction changed in a heartbeat. It rocketed across enemy lines, smashed toward the floor, which should have broken up to bits or, given its shape, sent it rolling off into the sunset, and stopped dead for a split second. Heloisa, standing a couple of yards away from the end of it, whipped around to face it just in time for it to crash into her legs and send her flying as it barreled in a perfectly straight line along the floor down the enemy course. It left a large trail of dirt across the white floor in its wake. Go! Maricel shouted. She wrapped her arms around herself, perhaps to keep herself from accidentally using her magic anymore. The cylinder shot dead center through the fire obstacle, out the other end, and into the pipe, the very thin edge on the bottom of the obstacle shaving off some mortar but doing little to halt the juggernaut's progress. Now stop. Its creator ordered. Don't go all the way through. Greater than there was no way for her to control the dirt with her voice, and Alden fully expected to see it launch itself out of the pipe like a bullet given how fast it had entered. But it did stop. Not in the middle, where Maricel had probably wanted it. Instead, about half of the bulk, crumbling from its violent journey, emerged from the end. No. I threw it too hard. They'll be able to dig it out easier from there. I'm so sore. Her apology was cut off by cheers and laughter from the rest of the team. That was awesome, said Hoyu. Heloisa, we're sorry. Everly called. And Jerry shouted, your aim is amazing, Maricel. It really is, said Alden. That was a super long shot. And you hit Heloisa on the way. We might have just won, said Reinhard. They're track runners about to reach the gym and have to dig. Maricel took Heloisa out at the knees, and it was pretty severe. She's belly crawling toward the rope climb. Frighteningly fast. But we can count her out. I think. Let's push for the finish line, said Hoyu. All of us. Alden began prepping his cord. Since we're all going for it, priority order over the line is easy to figure out. He had put Jerry and Lucille up and over together. Jerry would head for the finish with Jeffy's help. Reinhard would target someone on the other team as soon as she was over. Lucille would be able to haul people up with a cord from up there as well. Everly would go through, then Alden and Hoyu. Versus this team, it was fine for Reinhard to stay in his sniper position until the last minute, so he had finished the course off with the 3S ranks. Surprisingly soon, Alden was up on top of the wall himself, looking down into the water. The tank was a giant L shape, with the longer, vertical side of the L abutting the wall. There were small floats that had to be dragged underwater and put in wire traps along the way before the escape hatch at the other end of the L would unlock. The traps periodically set the floats free again. It wasn't complicated, but it was exhausting to get the floats all down. Unless you had an aqua brute on your team. Jeffy was down at the bottom of the tank now, trapping one of the floats. Thanks to his skill he could drag all of them at once if he wanted, and just walk around at the bottom holding them in complete defiance of buoyancy. He's probably a little disappointed it's all going so well. They had promised they would send him back out to the track at least once to help and protect whoever had died so that he could show off his land moves to the principal. We'll have to let him attack someone next time. Alden jumped. Hoyu was right behind him. He held his breath as he hit the water, and before he could resurface, a hand grabbed him around the ankle, and he sank like a rock despite the lungful of air. He kept his eyes closed as they went down. The vertical portion of the tank was about 30 feet deep, and when you reached the bottom, you swam through a passage toward the escape hatch. Jeffy was supposed to shove them right toward it, so it was very low effort. I wonder if he could have caught the mission. Probably. At the very least, he would have had more options than stripping down to his underwear and trying to bait it with his own pants. They reached the bottom and a hand pushed Alden forward. He opened his eyes and swam. A few seconds later he was emerging from the escape hatch, the magic barrier letting him slide right through. The final obstacle was simple, a tightrope walk. The metal cable they were supposed to walk across was only a couple of feet off the ground, but every fall punished you with a 5% total body movement penalty. I'm pretty sure this is going to go really well, Alden thought as he hopped up onto it. It was exactly the kind of challenge his new word chain should turn into a non-challenge. He took his first couple of steps and smiled. Thanks, Loot. He strolled the rest of the way over the finish line. Everyone who'd gone ahead of him was waiting with big smiles on their faces. Line of asterisks, I see, Sleyca said, holding the magical device she was using as a megaphone when it suited her down by her side and staring at a notice she'd just received through her interface, that one of our students has earned some jealousy already. Only one? Torsten Klein asked. He was watching Maricel stumble over the finish line and beam as Astrid and Everly patted around the back. We have several standouts. They should all be exceptional in some way, the principal answered. But I meant Alden. Someone just used the reporting system to share their suspicions that he's using some kind of performance-enhancing drugs. They obviously didn't appreciate his jaunty demeanor as he finished the race. A shame. I rather liked it. It's a word chain, Klein said, shifting his gaze toward Alden. "We told him not to bring it to class again until he could cast it himself. I thought we wouldn't see it again for a few more weeks, if he kept up with it at all." Do I detect a hint of approval? "It depends on whether he actually did cast it himself. Does he strike you as a cheater?" "He doesn't." He frowned. "Do you think he plans to supplement himself more extensively than usual with word chains?" "It will be a lot of studying if he does. We have a few students who try, but we don't really leave them much time for it. I've always thought shoring up word chain knowledge was more of a postgraduate endeavor." Klein nodded once. "Leveling to secure more foundation points and talents offers an improvement with no drawbacks. But his unusual dexterity and speed allocations. Maybe he did it specifically because he was hoping to make up for his rank in class with chains? He should have mentioned it during his interview if that was the case." "You could just ask him," she said mildly. He sighed through his nose. "Maybe after I've seen more evidence that it's actually a good idea for him and not a waste of his time. He can also do several things with his skill that he wasn't capable of a few short weeks ago," she pointed out. He didn't answer. "Morrison wants him to catch bullets with it." Klein rolled his eyes. "It's a robust skill," he said. "We'll find out how robust soon enough. And then we'll see." Line of asterisks. Once they were all over the finish line, giddy with excitement at their first win and drinking from their water bottles while the other team used the remaining minutes on the clock to struggle through the course, Jeffy watched the drone footage of Maricel's epic attack. He'd been able to hear them all talking about it under the water, but he couldn't see it. He felt like he'd missed out. "That was so cool," he said, gnawing on a strip of jerky. Maricel beamed. It looks like their pipe is pooping if you watch it in reverse." Maricel's smile froze. "What?" Alden tried not to laugh. Everly snorted. "I thought so too." "What?" "Your creation did look a little like a giant." Hoyu caught a glimpse of her expression and quickly changed tactics. "But everyone was totally focused on your perfect shaping. You look on spring. Definitely the MVP. It's not your fault you wanted to plug a pipe, and pipes are pipe-shaped." "Oh no," Maricel stared back at the other team. "Maybe nobody else noticed what it slightly resembled," said Jerry. "Except for Jeffy, Everly, Hoyu, and me." There was a pause. "I noticed," said Lexi. Maricel groaned. Tobe continued,